How do you focus on learning when you're in the middle of a war? Students and teachers across Ukraine will have to adjust to that reality as the new school year gets underway for many today. When kids head back to school, this will be the new normal. Bomb shelters built inside schools to protect against Russian attacks. There are signs the war is already taking a toll on children's mental health and their ability to learn. And one educational worker says there's a risk of a lost generation of Ukrainian children if they can't go to school. Our next guest saw some of those challenges firsthand as he took these pictures in Ukraine. Ashley Gilbertson is a photojournalist who documented the impact of the war on children for UNICEF. Ashley joins me now from New York. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, no problem at all. Thank you.
So, Ash, the latest United Nations assessment is hard to read. 1,000 children killed or injured since the war began in Ukraine, thousands more traumatized. And you just returned from an assignment with UNICEF focusing on the state of children there. What did you find?
Well, first of all, that number is like the verified number. So the real number is going to be a lot higher than that. But I found that as you would expect, the war is awful for children, except this one is particularly bad because the use of explosive weapons, so cruise missiles or artillery, these projectiles, they're hitting children very severely in civilian areas. They're getting lodged in playgrounds, in schools. So it's not just the explosion in buildings, but it's aftermath as well. Children beyond just the fighting exposed to these deeply distressing events. So I meet 8, 9, 10-year-olds who are telling me stories that you wouldn't want to hear from your closest adult friend. Just deep, deep trauma. But beyond that, fleeing the violence, they're risking family separation, they're risking violence and abuse. I mean, sexual exploitation. Like I saw signs taped up to the wall at Kiev train station, like I can get your girls out of Ukraine. These are not honorable people putting those signs up.
Yeah, and as you were talking with us, we're looking at your incredible images there, and around 2,300 education buildings have been damaged by war, nearly 300 totally destroyed. School starts today in many cities across Ukraine. How are kids preparing, and what kind of emotions will they be taking along with their book bags?
Well, I think that this is where we start seeing the resilience of children. That we have so much to learn from them in some ways. There's always hope when you're dealing with these kids and one of those big hopes is really school. Going back to school, they're so excited to see their friends. I met kids who were saying, like they love the atmosphere at school, and I sort of pushed harder, what's the atmosphere? And it's their friends. It's this community. But that said, I spoke to an 8-year-old who told me he's a bit sad because not all his friends are there because they left after the city was liberated by Ukrainian forces. So this knowledge that we try to protect our children from, this trauma is like very real and sort of daily in Ukraine. But they're very, very excited about going back to school.
And we've been continuing to look at some of the images that you took in Ukraine. I do want to highlight a couple of photographs and get the stories behind them. The first is Masha posing in front of what was her classroom in Kharkiv. What more are you able to tell us about her?
Masha was, I think, more grown up than most of my friends that are war correspondents are. She was 12 years old. And she's standing in front of her school, and she told me they bombed it about a month ago. It was an airstrike, and I don't know why. And I remember photographing her, and I've got to hold myself together while I'm making these pictures, especially in front of the kids. But you hear that, like, I don't know why they bombed it. Just the innocence. She said, I thought that COVID was bad, but this is the worst time of my life. And so I asked what she wanted to do. She wants to be a psychologist, because she wants to hear people's problems that have come up through the war and outside of the war and try to help them. She told me that she started keeping a journal of her thoughts. She started meditating and doing yoga to try to deal with the stress. Like the strength of Masha, I was so moved by. She told me she was in a bomb shelter when the bombing started, like when the war started. Her friend had an asthma attack. So she started calming her friend down with breathing exercises under Russian shelling, saying, "It'll be all right. You won't die. Everything's going to be okay." A 12-year-old girl. And these are the positions that us adults, are putting these kids in. You know, they are the ultimate, the most vulnerable victims in this conflict.
Yeah. And clearly her story and all these children's stories have touched you very deeply. What about Diana? She's on rollerblades here in a suburb of Kharkiv. Her school was also destroyed. What more did you learn about her and her life?
Right. Diana was a 9-year-old that we found in Saltivka. Saltivka is a neighborhood in Kharkiv that was actually the largest residential neighborhood in all of Ukraine. And it was hit very, very hard by the Russians throughout the beginning of the war. So the Russians pulled back a little bit, but it's still being hit by missiles and by artillery. So apparently when Diana returned after evacuating for a little while, her mum told me that she started crying and said, "I don't want to be here. All the buildings are destroyed." But Diana said, she turned to her mum and said, "It's okay, like I've gotten used to it." She's living in a huge apartment complex, building after building after building. There's not one window that is still intact. Russian shells still come in every night, every day. And in fact, I mean, she told me about her birthday, having it in a bomb shelter, and she didn't want cake, she didn't want anything. All she wanted to do was go to the park with her mum. But she can't go to the park or the playground or her old school because it's all filled with unexploded ordnance. So she rollerblades outside her apartment. And that night, I went back to the hotel, and there was a huge explosion. And the hotel, I mean, the city shook. And it was the same night that a cruise missile hit that, hit the dormitory of the, in Kharkiv, killing 14 people. She was okay, thankfully, but living in an environment like that, I've never seen anything like it.
It is just such a horror, and it's so important that you share these stories, that we understand what is going on in the lives of these young children living through this war. And when this war does eventually come to an end, the suffering, of course, won't be over for the children of Ukraine. What will they need to help heal their scars, if that's even possible?
Well, I'm not sure about healing scars ever, right? But you learn how to carry what they've experienced. And I think that in order to do that, they're going to need a lot of psychosocial help. I mean, all of these buildings we can rebuild, but the scars that they're going to carry will need, real attention from experts. But I mean, I think most importantly, we need a ceasefire. We need this war to stop. I mean, the most important thing for all of these children in Ukraine is that we find a way to peace, that we can find diplomacy rather than artillery and cruise missiles. UNICEF, in this case, has been doing incredible work in Ukraine, direct work in conflict zones, on the front line, working to fix schools, help children. And I was deeply moved by the work they were doing. So supporting them is a start now.
Ashley Gilbertson, thank you so much for sharing your incredible images and the stories behind them. We appreciate it.
Thank you.